There is a strange contradiction in human behavior that often goes unnoticed until you experience it yourself. The moment life finally becomes calm, stable, or even joyful, something inside the mind begins to tighten. Instead of relaxing into happiness, a subtle discomfort appears, as if the brain is waiting for a hidden cost to arrive. It is not obvious fear, not loud anxiety, but a quiet anticipation that something good cannot possibly last. And that raises a difficult question. Why would the mind resist the very state it has been searching for?
Have you ever reached a moment where everything seemed to be going right, yet instead of enjoying it fully, you found yourself scanning for what might go wrong next? To understand this pattern, psychology suggests that fear of happiness is not actually a fear of happiness itself, but a learned response shaped by memory, expectation, and identity. The mind is not designed to prioritize emotional comfort. It is designed to predict outcomes and reduce risk. When past experiences repeatedly connect positive moments with later disappointment, the brain begins to treat joy as a temporary signal rather than a safe state.
One of the clearest explanations comes from defensive pessimism, a cognitive strategy studied in personality psychology. People who use this thinking style lower their expectations, not because they lack hope, but because they are trying to emotionally prepare for potential failure. In their internal logic, expecting less reduces the impact of loss. Over time, however, this strategy can become automatic. Even when life improves, the mind continues rehearsing negative possibilities, as if optimism itself has become unsafe. Imagine someone who has experienced repeated instability in relationships or career situations. Each time something good happened, it was followed by disappointment. Eventually, their nervous system begins to associate calm periods with an approaching disruption. So when happiness appears again, it does not feel like safety. It feels like the calm before a known storm. Another important lens is attachment theory, particularly the patterns formed in early relational environments. Individuals with anxious or inconsistent attachment histories often develop a deep sensitivity to emotional change. If love, attention, or safety was unpredictable during childhood, then stability in adulthood can feel unfamiliar rather than comforting. The nervous system learns that closeness can shift without warning, so even positive emotional states trigger subtle vigilance. This is why some people struggle most when life is going well in relationships. Instead of relaxing into connection, they begin overanalyzing tone shifts, delayed messages, or minor changes in behavior. The happiness itself is not the problem. The expectation of its loss is. In this way, the mind stays anchored in protection mode, even during safe experiences. A third psychological layer involves identity-based cognition. People often build their sense of self around familiar emotional states. Someone who has spent years in struggle may unconsciously identify as a person who overcomes difficulties. Hardship becomes part of their internal narrative. When life becomes peaceful, that identity is disrupted. Without challenges, they may quietly ask themselves who they are supposed to be now. This creates a subtle psychological tension. Happiness requires presence, but identity requires continuity. When those two conflict, the mind often chooses continuity, even if it means undermining joy. So the person may unintentionally create small problems, not because they want suffering, but because familiarity feels more stable than emotional emptiness. Neuroscience also adds another layer to this pattern. The brain's threat detection system, particularly the amygdala, is more sensitive to potential danger than to positive outcomes. This negativity bias is not a flaw. It is a survival mechanism. However, in modern emotional life, it can become overactive. When everything is going well, the absence of threat can paradoxically feel suspicious, as if the brain is waiting for missing information. This is why happiness can sometimes feel uncomfortable rather than relaxing. The nervous system interprets unpredictability as a signal to stay alert, even when there is no actual danger present. When these layers combine, learned expectation, attachment history, identity structure, and biological bias, the result is a subtle but persistent feel of happiness. Not because happiness is dangerous, but
but because safety feels unfamiliar.
What makes this pattern so important to understand is that it is not fixed. These are learned associations, not permanent traits. The mind can gradually relearn that stability does not always precede loss, and that positive emotional states do not require anticipation of collapse. And perhaps the most meaningful shift begins with awareness. The moment you notice yourself waiting for something good to end, you are already observing a pattern rather than living inside it. That small distance is where change begins. So the question is not whether you deserve happiness, but whether your mind has learned how to stay with it without preparing for its disappearance. If this perspective resonates with you, take a moment to reflect on where in your life calmness feels unfamiliar and why. Sources and references: Beck A.T., 1976, Cognitive Therapy and the Emotional Disorders. Bowlby J., 1988, A Secure Base, Parent-Child Attachment and Healthy Human Development. Norm J., 2001, The Positive Power of Negative Thinking, Defensive Pessimism Research. American Psychological Association, APA, Stress and Emotion Regulation Resources.